36 weeks, 36 teams, 26 regular season races, 10 elimination style, and then 4 guys make it to the end, right? Big crew chiefs, spotters, staff, all working and talking together at the same time. I don't know how people can say it's a boring sport.
And they're putting on the show. It got your heart racing when you're at the beginning of a race, the national anthem, the planes fly over. You don't witness that on TV. You cannot describe the feeling, I promise you. It's better than any drug, alcohol, anything you can do.
They knew at that moment, if a tire comes off of that car at 200 plus miles an hour and flies into the stands, or worse, the car or anything, the sport is done.
You can get hurt walking across the street, but if something bad happens in racing, they beat that drum.
So ironic, like they instituted a rule.
They had me in a trailer screaming at me, all their jigs fit.
Yeah, you know.
But it pissed them off when they seen the creativity in there.
Fired up all this innovation.
There's like 13 or 14 rules in the NASCAR rule book against things we came up with. They made it illegal on the spot.
Wow. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Racetrack Prince podcast, where we preserve the world's most iconic tracks and the stories that define them. I'm your host, Jared Noah, and I'm joined by my special guest, Keith Wilson of Wilson Manifolds. 40 plus years in racing, master of the air, the man, not the myth, the legend. Thanks for having us here. We appreciate you letting us come on and do this today.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm usually behind the scenes, not looking to be interviewed, but what you're doing for the sport and racing in general is a passion of mine, and I'd love to see the tracks prevail and do well.
Well, we're trying to do what we can, and I think that the first order of business is just bringing awareness to people that we are losing these tracks, and also trying to preserve the stories that were made there by the people who've been doing it since the beginning. So, you know, speaking of the beginning, most of us don't grow up in racing. We fall into it, or we get excited by it, and then we kind of take it up as a hobby. But what can you share with us about what it's actually like to grow up in a racing background, a racing family?
Good question. I don't know anything else because I was born into it, but my father raced for Sunbeam Alpine when I was born. Raced Sebring and some other races, and he ran rallies. So I was around it from a young age. Then my dad had a shop, and he started renting stalls out to other racers to share expenses. So we had drag cars in there, you know, round track cars, and then of course road racing.
And your dad also grew up in it as well, or he was first generation racer?
My father was first generation. My grandfather was into cars, but he didn't race.
How do you think your dad got the bug?
I think anybody gets in a race car or gets around it, it's a addicting passion.
Yeah, that's for sure. So he used to do rallies as well?
Yeah, he did like local type rallies and ran a Sunbeam Alpine. And then he road raced. And then when we moved to South Florida, he had a business and a shop. So we ended up building a car for my stepmother, Spitfire. Triumph Spitfire. And she went to driver's school at what was then called Palm Beach International. Now it's called Palm Beach International. Mm-hmm. Before it was Moroso. Yep. And she went to driver's school, and my parents would sign waivers so I could work corners, and I got good at it because I could tell if they were coming in too hot or whatever. So they put me on the most active corner, and she went to driver's school with Lynn St. James, who became an IndyCar driver and a GTP driver in IMSA.
Oh, same time, huh?
The same school, and I'd known Lynn since I was a kid.
Wow.
But I used to work corners because we would go to the racetrack. We camped out there, and as a family, you know, run all weekend.
Cool.
I actually had a car hit the place I was sitting.
Yeah.
You know, behind a guardrail and sand and barrels. And
did you flinch?
I probably did more than that. But he flipped and ripped the tarp off the top, you know, to keep the sun off me. And all I can remember is his eyes this big, and he's probably, all he remembers my eyes are that big. And he went over me and kept going. So,
holding his breath, right?
Yeah, me too.
Jeez. Yeah. Well, I mean, you get that close sometimes. I was filming XDC in Texas in 2011. Funny enough, we were talking off camera about Chelsea Denofa. That was, he won the what do you call it? He won the championship. But while I was filming that, I was in like the center pit of the track where all the photographers were hanging out, and we had these big like parking stop like blocks that were meant to, you know,
Right,
sort of a last ditch like duck and cover or something comes at you. And this one car, I think it was a Sicky car, just lost control and then started doing like a 360, like sliding into the gravel. And I just remember in my subconscious, I might get hit, but this shot's going to be awesome. And the gravel's flying at you. I feel like these rocks coming, but I couldn't break away from the shot. I figured at the last second I'd just, you know, duck. But fortunately, nothing happened. But I know what it's like to kind of be locked in to the adrenaline of the moment and just kind of let it fly. Because it's, I don't know, it's an addiction at some point.
At that race, Chelsea probably had her Manifold on. He's a great guy, great talent, and a great person.
Awesome.
But at Moroso, or then it was Moroso later in years, you know, I went there for drag racing. We ran drag cars. Robbie that works for me, Mansfield, that does all our welding and fabricating. We ran his cars, and then I've been there for testing for different vehicles over the years.
I'm sure.
It was a great place. It was close to us. You know, we have the weather year round, so people would come from all over to test, you know, because you don't have to deal with the cold weather.
You have consistent conditions.
Correct.
Down here when you're testing.
Right.
So people that would come down to test from elsewhere, give me an example, you know.
There's a few tests I probably can't mention too much about, but the one of them was a road race car. And I helped them aero-wise, too. Helped them with the engine, the restrictors. They run Le Mans. They ran all over the world. But we were concentrating on, I was concentrating. They had a driver in there just doing chassis stuff. So they would send him out, but I was taking and putting like oil, like I'd make up a blend, and put dots around the car so I could see where the airflow was.
No kidding.
And I helped them make a deflector out of the radiator exit because the radiator was air went through the nose, out the hood, over the windshield, and right in the scoop for the engine. So we lowered inlet temperature like 30 degrees. You know, so it's horsepower. There's no rule against it. You know, so I help teams, you know, Aero, air inlet, and I've also looked at exhaust systems.
And you've been innovating like this for a long time. And I would say I border on the side of like, is it equal parts like talent and then the science? Yes, you need a little bit of both. You need to see the vision first, and then how do I actually make this happen? Like you said, putting the oil.
Pretty common question when I do get interviewed. People, you know, think I'm an engineer. I'm not. I'm very dyslexic, and I have a special talent. You know, I got kicked out of college for traveling on race teams too much. You know, I was missing days. I think I say it's a God-given talent. I have a knack for understanding air better than most. But it's also a ton of hard work, and it's also working with the best teams in the world because you have real feedback. You know, it's not a, did it run good or, you know, why did it run good or why it didn't run good? Because you learn just as much from what failed if you study it close enough. It gives you good direction to move forward. So you know, we test a lot at Palm Beach in drag cars, road race cars. You know, I look at aero on a car. You know, I'm not an aero expert on the outside, but I understand enough and I study where the air's going into the engine.
Enough to be dangerous, yeah.
Oh, we've found improvement, so it's worked in a lot of cases.
I know that I try to do what I can to be informed about, you know, the background of the people that I want to interview and that I want to speak with, because I want to be able to ask thoughtful questions about the things that you've experienced. Because if someone came to me and be like, hey, can you recall, you know, everything you've ever done? Like, it's difficult, but I want to come up with maybe a couple of examples that we can talk about. Like you talked about feedback and communication. In my research, I know that Earnhardt Sr., in some of the testing that you guys would do, that communication was really important. Like, what can you share about that type of relationship as far as finding someone that you just have that good synergy with? Because it doesn't happen all the time, and that's in any industry, any business. But when you find that person, that relationship really shines.
I've had that with many teams, you know, road race, drag race, you know, like again, I'm more behind the scenes. I knew him some, but I dealt with his engine builders and I knew his driving style or what he wanted from the engine builder. So I communicated more with them.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I did speak to him and stuff, but the engine builders, he was all about off the corner. If he come out off the corner hooked up and he got in front of you, you're not getting by him. So he always wanted torque. And there was a chance, at Atlanta one time, I knew they were going there, is when he had his running for his 7th championship.
Yeah.
So I called his engine builder. Him and Richard Petty are tied at 7 championships.
Mm-hmm.
So, naturally his dream was to get to 8th, everyone on the team, from Richard Childress down. And so I called the engine builder and I said, let me do a different manifold. Because Atlanta, when they ran the race then, it was always cold. And back then, NASCAR guys didn't look at air quite like drag racers did. And part of our, going off base a little bit, part of our talents is I work with so many forms of motorsports. You learn from all of them. Yeah. So what I told him was, air's going to be dense. We can run a bigger manifold, shorter runner. It's not what Earnhardt usually wanted because he wants all the torque down low. But the air's going to be better. So I talked them into it that we'll dine on. So it picked up quite a bit. I forget now how much. And he went to Atlanta, and that's when they went to radial tires from Biasply. So he wasn't qualifying always where he could. He wasn't. He didn't like the radial as much as the Biasply because he could drift or slide the bias. Once the radial would break loose, I'm not a driver, but been told it snaps loose. So, but during the race, he came right to the front, and then he got hit. But unfortunately, it was like the last 2 or 3 races a year. I was hoping he would win the race and just help him at points. He's finished 2nd, but, and he never forgot that. He knew that I always tried for him. And he actually came up to me, which I said in another podcast years ago. He came up to me and hit me in the chest like this. And he said, they better get effing fuel mileage. And I go, what do you want me to do?
Yeah.
You want everything. But,
I know the fuel mileage was obviously important to him. And I've learned a lot about, the science behind all this. It's just, I think when you look at it on its face, the sport, right? 36 weeks, 36 teams, 26 regular season races, 10 elimination style, and then 4 guys make it to the end, right? Pit crew chiefs, spotters, staff, all working and talking together at the same time. I don't know how people can say it's a boring sport.
No, I think some of the rules, and I'm not smart enough to create all the rules, but there's time back then that there was more racing. There was, the lead changes were a lot. They would rub on each other a little bit. The racing's changed some with the different style cars and how the rules are. But he was impressive to watch, and he understood Aero better than most, and then most of any drivers. So he actually felt the air. He wore a half helmet or a, open face helmet.
Yeah.
And he'd feel the air on his cheek. And he knew going through the air that like a boat, the wave, he would put that wave in your wheel well. Like you'd watch him last few laps at Talladega or Daytona.
Yeah.
He'd just come through them like he had nitrous, and he didn't have nitrous, but he was just an unbelievable talent.
Yeah, I mean, I've only seen a handful of things that I've been able to watch, and really it's captivating, because he understood it.
And at that time, Childress's team, all his guys, like they did a lot of their own manifolds too. Like they had a lot of talented people there, and their morale was so good with how he treated them and how he ran the car. They were proud to work day and night, or they just had a good team. Like you can see teams how they treat each other, and instantly. I've been around it so long in Cup. You can see if, like the chassis guys don't like the engine guys, and, usually the crew chief's buddies with the driver because they're tight. They got to be tight.
Sure.
So, when teams are pointing the fingers, they never run good. When teams try to help each other in any form of motorsport or business or anything, it's just a much better team.
What do you think makes a good team?
Obviously people, but it's, I try to do it here as well. Try to involve everybody. No one person's smarter than a group. So the more you can educate the people around you, the more they're involved and the more they're passionate about it. We've had people here, we get talking like open have a meeting and like, I want to come out with this. Like, what do you think? And like, oh, that's what we need to do. And I think they had that. They had a good rapport with all the people. And there's other teams now, Hendricks, you can go on and on. But it's about getting the right people and pulling on the same rope.
Yeah.
And
you said you've had the benefit of working with a lot of amazing people and witnessing these amazing teams over the years. So you kind of get to borrow some of these best practices.
You asked about my talent. I think working with the top people in the world in engines and looking at engine data and being around them testing, being with the best people dynoing, being with the best drivers track testing, you have to they've honed my ability to look at things because everything we build gets tested by the best people. There's no like, oh yeah, it made, you can exaggerate on the internet. Yeah, it picked up 20.
Right.
These people are.
We put the dyno sheet on the website.
And you're their best friend when you pick up and they're MFing you when it doesn't. You know what I mean? So it's a tough environment. But if we did go the wrong way, we usually get the information and recover, and then I've gained a bunch of credibility with the teams in all forms of motorsports that even if we go the wrong way, we usually can, give us the information why, and we can make a gain out of it. Because not, anybody racing tells you everything you do is a gain is not honest.
Yeah, I'm not a racer, but I've been around this industry long enough to know when things are exaggerated or embellished. And, at the end of the day, you got to test it out yourself sometimes. I think that phenomenon you're talking about of people kind of getting on each other's cases, that's just everyone's going for excellence, really.
It's the same in sports or football teams, or it's the people that gel together, that not worried about beating their chest to be the hero on the team. You know what I mean? It's that involvement, that kind of people that are for the good of the whole team. Now, the drivers, like the quarterback, they get all the recognition. It doesn't bother me. I'm in the background. As long as our parts help them do something, I'm happy.
It's all the recognition.
Right. I don't need to be recognized. I just want our parts to do good and to be able to sell more or let people know about them.
Yeah. I've done my research on the Restrictor plate era. That's how it's commonly defined now, as an era. That's when you've been kicking ass for a long time, And I understand the fundamentals of what you were working with and how you had to get creative and to figure out, how do we really get that extra power now that we're already dealing with the ceiling. I think it went from cars were able to do 750 to 900 horsepower. And now we're talking in the 400 to 600 range.
Knocked them in half.
Yeah. And this really came about because, of a safety issue. I think it was in 1987. I don't remember what track that it was at, but either during a qualifying lap, there was a car that hit, it was over 210. I think it was 212 miles per hour. And the officials,
Bill Elliott,
they knew at that moment, if a tire comes off of that car at 200 plus miles an hour and flies into the stands, or worse, the car or anything, the sport is done, and they're like, we got to put some rules on this.
Well, I think it was more their insurance.
Yeah.
They were covered till 200.
Okay. So the thin red line said after 200 miles an hour.
Well, they were looking at average when in-car cameras showed 210 on the back straight, but the average was, that's when they installed the restrictor plates. And NASCAR, or there's no sanctioned body that wants any fans hurt.
Absolutely not.
And unfortunately, in our world, our media, the most you hear about racing is when something bad happens.
That gets clicks and that gets views.
So if something does happen, you can get hurt walking across the street. But if something bad happens in racing, they beat that drum. And, in NASCAR or any sanctioned body doesn't want, naturally they don't want anybody hurt to begin with. So, they're protecting their sport.
Yeah.
So I think it's the right thing to do. I disagree how it was done. The restrictor plate was an ugly, ugly thing on the engine side of things.
Well, it also had changed fundamentally the way that the races went on. It changed the level of the stakes. We can agree that it's for the better, but it also changed the way that the fans looked at the type of racing. And for a long time, when did it end again? I think this is only in recent history, right?
No, they're still running restrictors, but they're a tapered restrictor instead of a flat plate. the flat plate was shearing, carburetor's whole job, they were carbureted, and their whole job is to vaporize the air. People call it atomization. You're not changing the atoms, you're vaporizing the air. It's a much more robust burn in the combustion chamber. So, but it looked like Niagara Falls off that plate. It was so violent that the plate would wear.
Wow.
The edge of the plate, the two little holes or four little holes inside the large holes of the 4-hole spacer.
Mm-hmm.
So it should have been a tapered spacer then, and but NASCAR thought it was an economical way to just slow them down. Well, all the teams went back to work. They spent more money than they did on open engines.
How do we overcome this?
Yeah, because Daytona 500 is their Super Bowl, so they spent a lot of their budget for the first race.
And you're talking about like the wear on the plate at a track like Talladega, for example, where the conditions are pretty savage. There's so much vibration as well, right? While you were doing those tests,
Well, I can tell you some. I don't know what to say, but there's like 13 or 14 rules in the NASCAR rule book against things we came up with to make more power, make better distribution. My job is to help them find power, and we would rough up the bottom of the floor because the droplets would hit so hard, it would beat 4 smooth holes or spots in the bottom of the manifold in a 500-mile race. That's how violent the droplets are hitting. So we were trying to splinter them up or break them back up, because once you have wet fuel, there's usually no vaporizing it. Again, it goes in the chamber and it's burning out the pipe.
Right. You've lost it at that point.
And in NASCAR, they need fuel mileage. One less stop or something is a difference of winning a race. So fuel mileage was always a problem.
Eventually,
or always something you had to pay attention to, whether it's open or, and they still do.
I would love to eventually go to Daytona 500, and take my son and have that experience, especially now after kind of getting into the excitement of it. And I just wish that we had a local track that we could go to, instead of having to go,
Right.
all the way up, for example, to Daytona, which really isn't that far in the grand scheme of things. But there's something to be said about having, a local track. I know that you actually spend time, working with local universities and kids, trying to get their certification, getting into the sport. And how much more difficult has it made it to kind of give back and do that and get them involved when we don't have access to a local track anymore, like Palm Beach?
I think it's vital, and that's why I appreciate what you're doing. We need tracks. I know population moves in. People move next to the airport and complain about sound. It's like, I don't understand why they let it all happen, but there are new tracks being built. IHRA is buying up drag strips and circle tracks like crazy and redoing them, so that's a big plus. There are some new tracks going in around the country. They're just not close to where they used to be close to us, and for other people too. But local tracks is vital for racing to continue, because grassroots racing, more people can afford it. You can walk up to the cars, you can walk up to the engine builder or the driver, ask questions and talk. They're very open usually. It's just a way to get somebody in, and you can always find a team or something to volunteer for, help them on the weekend, help them rotate tire, whatever the jobs are. And it gets you in, and then when they become dependent on you, well, can you do this? And you can move up the ladder. But it's hard to just walk into racing if you know nothing about it or don't understand it.
Yeah, you have no exposure.
Correct.
How are you supposed to get excited about it when you can't even get near it anymore?
Yeah, from being a crew chief or driver, a truck driver for a team, they get to see the world. They drive, if you're into driving and seeing the country, the truck drivers have a cool job. It's all, everybody has different likes, but there's plenty of work to be done in racing, and it takes a lot of people. And nowadays, we were talking offline, about how racing has changed. Well, racing used to be more grassroots. It didn't take as many people. Well, now everything's specialty. You work on fuel mileage, you work on chassis, you work on Aero. It's brought out a lot more technology, and it's forced everybody to get better in every application. That's why racing has gotten so fast. more aero, less fuel, just on and on.
Yeah, so much more technical now.
Brakes are better, safety's better. Safety's a big deal because, like we talked before, you don't want people to get hurt. And we work on a lot of safety products too.
Give me an example.
Like this throttle body in the boosted world in drag racing, they started out 15, 20 pounds. We started making a throttle body, worked really well. And there's other brands out there too, but they started breaking them because they were up in the boost.
Right.
Well, if you break the shaft, in the linkage, even though you close it and the shaft's broken, the air's going through it, the fly-by-wire or the sensor on this side is still telling it to give fuel. So it'll go off the end of the track, wide open throttle.
Jeez, that's dangerous.
We made a line of throttle bodies that hold up to 100 pounds of boost without leaking. And we went to a much bigger shaft and made it like an airplane wing. So we have a half-inch shaft in this, and in our 123s, we have a 5/8 shaft. And they actually outflow the competitors, but stronger. And it's just, I don't want anybody getting hurt. And that piece there in front of you, that is a pop-off. When they have too much pressure, we relieve the pressure right at the blade. Right. Instead of going back down the charge tube and trying to get out.
I saw the full configuration of that in your other room. Yeah, and it's very impressive.
Yeah, that's getting a lot of traction now because people expect that wave to stop at the blade, go back down the tube against pressure, and find a 90-degree hole that's the size of the piece. Well, we made the hole 3 times bigger, so naturally it makes a low pressure area. As soon as the blade shuts, it hits it. So that's been a
Who's been enjoying this right now?
A lot of people, and it's actually helped the longevity of the chargers and the turbos because the back charge doesn't bounce into the blade. So they've gotten better life out of their blowers and chargers.
I bet they're happy about that.
Yeah. And it saves them a lot of money. And you race next round. It's safety. I've been on racing enough in my life. I've seen enough people get hurt or pass. And it happens in, a lot of things. I don't like it, and I don't like the fans that want to see wrecks. I like seeing rubbing and, racing each other, but I don't like wrecks.
There's just something to say about some competition, but nobody should relish in something like that happening. It's terrible, first of all, and it's bad for the sport. And, well, sometimes people are just out for blood, and there's nothing you're going to do to stop them.
Yeah, no, I usually don't get into it, but
NASCAR's done as good of a job as anyone can trying to keep it a family-friendly sport. Like when they're doing the opener in the season, the tailgate culture, right? Trying to keep people interested in bringing their kids, their family. I mean, that's the next generation. So they're keeping it accessible, and that's what's also important to me. It's instead of referring to like videos and photos, it's like, hey, let's go. Right. Because we all remember what that's like to have that. Yeah,
there's TV and cameras take so much from it. When you hear it, feel it, smell it, it's a whole different atmosphere to be at a race.
It's completely different. I think that if there's a chance that Palm Beach International does come back, and on the episode that I did with Eric Bentley, who's working his damnedest to bring it back, we talked about accessibility for families, right? Like, and he made a point of saying like there was no sewage on site for Palm Beach, and the fact that we were still, and I remember this, porta potties, right? And he remarked, like, you and I may not care about using that. We're out there, getting tires, stuff blown in our face.
Women,
but your families, your kids, your wives and so forth, anyone who's coming to support you, they need some type of amenities, even when it comes to like, it's hard to hop in the car, make your way all the way out of the track, all the way down Beeline, go and stop at a gas station or get anything. And it's not, what's the word I'm looking for? It's not practical.
Correct.
So I think that, keeping that in mind, if there's ever going to be a resurgence, that would really help people get, the support that they want, especially if you're drivers. You want to come out there with your trailer, you want to stay for the weekend. No, I don't want to do that. That sounds miserable, so.
Well, there's several things there. Like iTrays, I talked to the new owner of that one time. We were talking briefly. I knew a NASCAR owner at the time. He owned the Hooters team. He passed. He was the engine builder turned car owner. And we were going in and out of the track at Charlotte. And it was $20 every time to go on the track. And he goes, do you think they charge Michael Jordan to go in the arena? It's like,
wow. Yeah.
I don't, I think tracks need to make sure everybody makes money and pay the competitors too.
They're athletes,
right?
Yeah.
Well, it costs them to get there.
Sure.
Some of these drag organizations treat the racer like they're in the way. They charge them a ridiculous amount to race. They pay them nothing to win, and they're putting on the show. And it's just not a fair scenario. All four sides need to be profitable and share. And like Cleetus now, and like Humpy Wheeler, like to promote tracks, he was a master. An absolute master. He used the track for waste management. He used it for concerts. He had a private club there. There was something going on there all the time. So there was revenue coming in. Most tracks like Moroso would do one big event a year. So
and then try to rely on the revenue
right.
from pop-ups and things like that.
And I think if tracks got more involved with the community, like what Cleetus has done, and do concerts, do car shows, do track days, do make the track more accessible and let the track make more money and support the community. They're going to be hiring people, taxes, all that stuff. The track should be an asset for the community, not a deficit. And they always treat tracks like they're just noisemakers, and it's not.
It's a nuisance,
right? And so
it's not benefiting our community.
Correct.
We don't want this. People don't want this,
right? But they need to turn that perception around, and be a positive thing for the community. Then people are going to be more behind it and not want to close them and do all that.
Well, it's going to take people who understand business, because at the end of the day, we can all have fun and get excited about having, sanctioned events and so forth, but it doesn't pay the bills for the whole year. You do need to think about other ways to monetize the track. Those are prime examples.
Well, I think, I don't know all the track promoters by any means. There's other good ones, but somebody should, track owners should study how Humpy Wheeler ran his tracks and what Cleetus is bringing the new people in with social media. Mm-hmm. I think a combination of those two would be very beneficial to racetracks. No matter if you're drifting, drag racing, swamp buggy, whatever it is, they need to use the facility more than one or two big events a year.
Earnhardt Jr. spent much of his time trying to bring back North Wilkesboro, and he was actually able to do it by getting the local government, to participate and giving a massive grant to have them bring back events at that track. He was actually able to show the commercial appeal back to NASCAR after he went back in, I think it was 2018 or 2019 with iRacing. He went out there with his team, weed whackers. They cleared the whole place to sort of bring it back to life a little bit so they could scan the actual track. And then they made that track accessible to people online to actually race at. And it was a genius idea, because how am I going to get people emotionally invested in the days of old if I can't actually give them anything they can see and touch? And now that people are actually able to race on it in a virtual environment, that brought back the excitement. And NASCAR kind of raised their eyebrows and, well, we actually still have something here. So why don't we actually go and bring back events? And if I'm not mistaken, they're going to do the first paying Cup championship in 30 years at that track. And that's really a great case study for what we need to be doing just around the rest of the country. And I think that, like you said, people should be paying attention to what is being done by Cleetus and others to not only preserve the tracks from stopping them from, shutting down, but even reclaiming old tracks and showing like there is an appeal to it for the community that's commercially viable. We can get the buy-in of the local government to show that we're not just a bunch of troublemakers trying to,
families are involved.
Yeah.
And it keeps people from racing as much on the street. You can't end it per se, but
it's never going to end.
Right. But you can keep people going to the track.
Yeah.
And Earnhardt Jr., I always had the privilege to do a lot of work for him, even when he was in late models. I knew the engine builder then, and when DEI was around, the father owned that, and we did a lot of manifolds for them.
Did you still work with him after he separated from them?
When he went to Hendricks, we did stuff for Hendricks for years and years. But what I was getting at was Earnhardt. I think NASCAR should use him more. Not only has he grown up around it, he was a great driver. He's actually a very intelligent business person. and his views on, and he's down to earth. He likes the fans. He can relate to the fans because he was all parts of that. He's been in every situation in racing you can imagine.
Right.
And if NASCAR would listen to him more and let him have more say, I think it's healthy for all of sports. And like you said, if that track comes back, that supports that community, more tax for that county.
It's tax revenue.
Right.
And show me the incentive.
Right.
If
And
ever
families from there that can't drive to, another track, or Charlotte's too big or something. And the other thing it does, NASCAR started building 1.5-mile tracks.
Mm-hmm.
They can put more people in. It's about the revenue.
Sure.
They still need the variety. NASCAR was made from short tracks.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying all should be short tracks, but showing the variety is smart. And I think what Dale Jr. has done is impressive to get NASCAR to get back there. And people love it. So it just shows that it was the right idea.
If he was able to do it now, and we sort of broke away from that tradition in the 90s when it became more commercial, like, oh, wow, we can put umpteen thousand people in the grandstands and, really make this thing pop. The proof is there.
They built California, Kansas. They built all these tracks. You got Michigan, Charlotte. They're all 1.5-mile tracks.
Yeah.
And it's all, the tracks are different. They drive a little different, but it's still a 1.5-mile track. It's a different race, and it's, I think they just got too cookie cutter in track design.
I really wonder if it's not from waking up and seeing what Grassroots is trying to do what they can in that sense, that they'll be forced to look at it because of other changes that are happening with technology. But they're not leaving their houses as much.
Right.
In general, sports venues, retail, anything that requires people to leave the house, like why would I go to the track and contend with all the, the annoyances that come with that when I can just stream it on Netflix,
And that's what, like you said, that's what's happened to golf and all these things. But like some of the things Cleetus has done again, or some of these other people, like when you went to a Charlotte race, it was a show. And that wasn't all on TV. Humphrey had airplanes, helicopters, parachuting out, or, roping down from a helicopter. They entertained the people. They made it
on a show.
Right. They made it where it got your heart racing when you're at the beginning of a race, the national anthem, the planes fly over. You don't witness that on TV or stream.
You can't replicate that experience.
So I think things change. And yet again, I'm not the smartest guy on the planet. I don't have all the answers. But something needs to be done. And you see certain people doing things that are having an effect. Like last week when I was at the Gator Nationals, it was packed.
I saw the picture of the line
getting in, yeah.
It just curves past the trees, and you can only imagine how far it goes after that.
3 or 4 miles long, the line. 2 lanes getting in. And that was for hours, it wasn't like for 15 minutes. But in Bradenton, the winter series, I went to a few of those, and the car count was high. There's, a lot of people, the stands are full. So there are ways to do it and to make it, entertaining for the person. You just don't want them sitting heat in the stands and, a couple cars go by. You got to.
Yeah, we know the miserable part is going to be there, the heat and all that stuff, but, it's got to be worth it.
Right.
What's the payoff for us, right? We want to see that action. What do you really think contributed the success to those last couple of events that you just talked about? The turnout.
I think NHRA is trying harder because IHRA is coming to life or growing rapidly. I think NASCAR has seen enough of their attendance and attendance on TV numbers to where they've gotten concerned and changing things. And again, I'm not the one to tell them how to do it. It's just it's obvious there's things that have to change. And I think they're addressing those things. So I see some growth in areas in racing. And like we talked about Chelsea before and drifting, he's making drifting affordable to the everyday guy. You don't have to have a pro team to go drift. Drifting's coming up. We need to keep building smaller or not all professional racing. It needs to let the people move up. Or some people are happy to have a bracket car. A good friend of mine, him and his wife raced bracket racing for years at all the Florida tracks. And
it's exciting. It's great
and he
fun.
was a good driver. He probably could have moved on, but he had a business. He enjoyed it. To me, I say it's his golf game. That's where he goes and gets away from everything. He can concentrate on his car, doing good. That's his entertainment. So I think Grassroots has to be maintained, and NHRA, IHRA, Nascar, Aero, all these things.
I mean, IHRA sort of, as far as I know, that's really where their chops is. It's like trying to make it accessible. They weren't as large or prolific of an organization as NHRA, but like that's really what their focus is on. And I think that NHRA kind of sees where they're headed with that. And maybe they need to, adjust.
Pick up their game, right?
Yeah, because eventually, look, this is happening in other industries. As an example, we're focused on a lot of jobs that we might lose because of artificial intelligence and so forth. But it's also paving the way. There's going to be a vacuum of the old trades that no one thinks about anymore. People used to scoff at, like, I don't want to be a plumber or an electrician or any of these things. Okay, but if you were doing that now, there's no one to pass off their knowledge for these professions. So the young guys that want to get into these professions, they're going to make $100,000, $200,000 a year being an electrician or being a plumber and so forth. Who's going to pass down that on the racing side if there's no access for these guys to come up? What's going to happen when a whole generation of drivers ages out? We're just going to, we had a good run.
Yeah, and there's plenty of new drivers coming in. I think you're dead right. In AI, we use it here, but we don't use it to tell us the answer. We use it to guide us procedure.
Right.
You know what I mean? I think some people want to be too dependent on it. And I'm no AI expert, but I don't think it's the end all answer. You're not just going to always talk into your, do this for me, do that. There's going to be some brain cells involved.
It's a tool.
Correct.
And you use that tool just like anything else in your toolbox to achieve the end result of your job. But when you wholeheartedly depend on something and you can't and shouldn't rely on it to that degree, then you're jeopardizing.
What do you do when the power goes down?
Yeah. Well, I guess we'll have to figure out how to do algebra at that point because we'll all be in trouble, A lot of what we're trying to do while we're having these kind of discussions is my background is filmmaking. And in filmmaking, my job as a director is to get the audience emotionally invested in the main character or whatever it is as quickly as possible. However they choose to invest in that, they like it, they hate it, they want to see somebody succeed or fail.
Tell a story.
Trying to tell a story. And I think that it's the stories that are going to keep people interested and attract them to spending more time learning about that sport. Like, I don't walk in, to any conversation pretending to know everything or being the guy that answers, like when someone says, oh, you know about this and that. Sure, of course I do. That's not what my role is. My job is to go on a journey and to bring everybody else along with me to learn more about these sports and these disciplines and to get excited about it so that when they leave the show or they turn the podcast off and it's over, that they're going on YouTube and they're watching all the races from the 90s, or they're going and watching MotoGP and being fascinated by the high stakes and like, this was legal, like we were allowing people to do this, So it's just, I want to keep the passion going and we want to preserve the tracks so that at the end of the day, if it just so happens that they do get closed or they get bulldozed, and at least we have that living memory of it. And hopefully new tracks are created in their place,
I think that's starting to happen. I want the same, and that's why I appreciate what you do. But racing is way more important than what most people think. Most of the safety issues and fuel economy issues in a production car today, a lot of it comes from racing. The impact zones, the aerodynamics, fuel consumption, how many transmissions are just braking, just on and on. How many things are done that is modeled in racing or engineered in racing ends up back in the OEs.
It's a proving ground.
Correct. And in like, the trend lately was the electric cars. All the OEs are getting away from it quietly because they lost billions. What people forget is most power plants are a fossil fuel power plant. They forget about the power plants
what it takes to make that power that they plug in.
Right. And every time there's a phase change of energy, there's a percentage of loss. So there's a percentage of loss at the, power plant. There's a percentage of loss charging the battery and then turning the wheel.
Sure.
And that's never discussed. I'm not against it. I think the marriage of both of them, if they use more, had a small engine, turbocharged, 3-cylinder, there's so much left in combustion engines. It's crazy.
Even in hybrid technology, like having that dance between the two, the major manufacturers are still
use
doing
deceleration to charge the battery. I'm for it, but just to say you plug in and you're not polluting and it's green is not necessarily true.
No, that's a bill of goods that they've been selling people for a long time.
But I deal with enough people in Detroit that it's quietly going away.
Yeah,
they know that's not the future, and they spent billions trying to get there.
There's a lot to be said about the hybrid technology that I think still has a ways to go. I mean, the major manufacturers are still playing around with this. We see all the news that's coming out about the ZR1X and the Corvette. You guys are you're still investing a lot in the R&D for the C8 platform in general, right?
Yes, sir. We're working. We've always been hardcore racing. We're trying to develop more high-end or street pieces for performance. This is our new C8 manifold that we designed, and GM sort of scoffed, we spent zillions on developing this engine.
What do you think you guys are going to do? Right.
Well, we end up picking up like 34 horsepower on just a bolt-on part.
Yeah. How about that?
And we're, developing now a fly-by-wire throttle body that we're working on now, not to just have one, to be better than what's out there flow-wise.
Mm-hmm.
But this flows so much air and it's so good on distribution. The engine, accelerate better. So on a chassis dyno, I made 34 more. But we look at everything aspect of it, as far as it fits under the stock application. All the things just bolt right up. It's not
You're thinking about the consumer. You're thinking about the installer the whole way through.
Correct.
Yeah. I mean, as an example, like where is this going to get like real world testing? Like, is that part of your process?
Yes, we chassis dyno. We had, customers such as Eric or other people dyno, because we don't want to, we ran on our chassis dyno, but we want other people to do it. So, we want somebody else to say it, not us.
Sure.
A lot of people beat the chest, online that we make a lot of power.
Yeah.
But, we want it proven, and we don't want to sell something that doesn't work by any means.
Mm-hmm.
We work our guts out to make the finest product, use the best materials. People say a lot of times that we're high priced. Well, I always invite them. You come here and stand here the whole time we work on something, and how many talented people touch it. It's not.
I was going to say, when you see behind the scenes of what's going on, you quickly understand. And in fact, question yourself, like, I'm actually grateful they've done everything they can to keep it accessible for people,
right.
Because,
and we're conscious of price, but it's to do it right and engineer it right. It takes a lot of time.
Yeah, it certainly does. And, the nice thing is this is actually going to get even crazier because tuning is now unlocked for the C8.
Yeah, that just happened.
So that's very exciting.
So that's going to be even more.
And everybody who's been waiting in line since, 2020 is like, okay, wait a second. So now who knows?
Well, we FEA tested it up to like 90 pounds of boost. So it's, it'll beat it already beats the other ones on the market, but they won't explode if people get crazy with boost. And we actually have the two fastest C8s in the world, naturally aspirated, and then one with the electric front wheels on a C8. So the two fastest C8s on drag racing run this manifold.
We're not running out of the need for fossil fuels anytime soon.
Well, not only that, they haven't figured out. I mean, there's still batteries may come a long way. I'm not saying it's not going to develop, but we don't have enough resources for battery or the pollution for battery. There's so many other. And then I heard also the characteristics of pollution from the cars are so heavy that the tire wear is the tire rubber pollution on the street. It gets washed into the drains.
Wow, really?
It's gone way up because the electric cars are so heavy.
Yeah.
So that's
not thinking about that.
They only talk about one thing. They don't go over everything, what the pros and cons are. There's pros too, but it's not what they thought it would be.
Well, they're putting a polish on it to make it sell to whoever it is, consumers, politicians, regulatory bodies. Yeah. And then somebody has to come in with a documentary that rips the whole air off the top and shows things like that.
Right.
And then, 20 million people watch it on Netflix, and all of a sudden the market changes. It's like, yeah, sometimes that's what we need to do and use our power for.
Fortunately, like you're saying, I've been around so much of this. I consult for a lot of race teams too, privately, and I help them with Aero or things I know in fields I know in drag race and round track, road race. But I've been consulting for a company called Mayman, and they're taking a production engine, direct injected, and we alter it to run 70% water, 30% alcohol. And GM's been there, Volvo, Rolls Royce. It's going to change. Now it's a slow burn. It's a low RPM piece. But it makes a lot of horsepower and torque. So they're making gen sets now, and they're green. And it's getting traction. And the more we research that engine, I got some of the best people around the world. Total Seal involved. I got piston companies involved. I got Jason Line. I bring in a lot of people, and where it's going, it can only get better. There's still more to learn.
Where do you see it going? What are you most excited about that when it reaches this peak efficiency or the direction it's headed in? What do you think is going to change?
We've been studying a lot of cylinder pressure analysis, and it's a different graph than anything we've ever seen. So we want to enhance that more. So the power stroke is longer and stronger. So it would be a torque scenario or low RPM. We haven't developed work towards a racing application. It's a low RPM piece. But even though we've been working on it 15 years, there's still a lot to learn. And I think, you can get water almost anywhere. Alcohol is readily available. It has hardly any pollution coming out. There's a lot of benefits to it. So in my lifetime and my kids' lifetime, internal combustion engines are going to be here. I want the planet as green as possible too. I'm not saying we shouldn't work on other things, but they're more viable to me. And I think this is going to take off.
I do.
They're getting so inundated with so many people interested in the program, but they haven't sold it yet. They're just starting to, because we wanted to refine it more and more.
Which one of the trade shows do you think that are in our industry you would go to kind of see more of this technology, more of these, new platforms? Like, is it going to be you said it's not a race application, so I'm not going to walk into PRI and see somebody
trying to see it.
Right. So
they've been there, and they introduce them to just some vendors, and PRI is great for racing. My personal opinion is I wish they'd tone it back, because it used to be an unbelievable show. You had IndyCar, NASCAR, you had the top engine builders walking around that. And when they started selling the boost to, the picture frame guy and the antique gas pump guy, and, they made it so big that people came there for hardcore racing. You had to be in the industry. You had to prove that you're in the industry. And I think they should do it, maybe add a day. People probably cuss me, but let
another day. Yeah.
But let anybody in, so they can learn about, I want new people in, but you need those days to business. And that's what it used to be. I think they diluted it, trying to sell floor space so much that it's hurt this show. And a lot of pro teams don't go anymore.
I understand the scope that they have to keep up with at that show.
They have to make money too. I'm not really trying to cut them down, but
but I think that
it's changed.
Maybe they're losing sight of the model.
Correct.
Because if you want guys who are paying for these advances, who are doing the R&D for the rest of the year and want to come and debut at the show or make those other connections with vendors for the sake of, growing their business and growing the industry, then that's your core audience. You really need to keep the whole model about how do we incentivize those guys to come, stay, bring their friends the next year, stay longer, spend more money, make more revenue for each other, instead of,
and you learn
that's
something.
Too hard to fix.
You get into conversation, I actually learn quite a bit.
Yeah.
The shows are great, but they're diluted nowadays. You get the people want decals in your catalog, and they just fill their suitcase full. It's like I want people coming racing. I want them to want a sticker. I'm not, again, trying to cut them down. But if they open the last day up to the public, that's fine. Let them learn about our sport or try to get involved or
it's another opportunity.
Correct.
Like we said, and we need everyone that we can get.
Right.
I mean, do you think there's something to be said for how do we infuse tracks into that situation, whether it's on a management level coming to talk about like, hey, come do events at our tracks. Let's host this at our track, or creating more awareness for the public, like how can we get the things that we are passionate about, that cause? Is there any way that they can make their way into those shows, or you don't think that's the place for it?
Like we were saying before, I helped University of Miami, UCF in Orlando, and then FSU, FAU in Boca with formal SAE. And I think that's the best program. If there's a student in college, you don't have to be an engineer. You can be in business. You can be in art. You can be in anything. You go help them develop that team because teams have all those jobs.
Right.
But it gets you around racing. A lot of those guys will go to the trade show or they'll send a few people. And it's a way, and all the judges, they compete in Michigan Speedway. And I go there every year with FAU, and I've helped them over the years.
How many kids usually go?
Hundreds. I don't know.
Wow.
They allow 130 colleges or 125 colleges from around the world to compete. There's no fans.
Sure.
It's just families and the students, and they have to compete. And there's 3 days of competition. They have to write a business report. They have to, they have to design and build a car, build the engine. It's amazing. Like Two Car Germany's got Porsche backing. They design their own chassis out of carbon fiber wheels. I mean, it's like Formula One to a lawnmower.
Sure.
But it's at a college
level.
Yeah.
Right.
And most of those guys, it was raining one time and the head of GM hiring was in their booth. Like there's booths there from the two rocket companies. They're trying to pluck kids out. Right. And all the judges are.
There's no better place for them to scout these kids.
All the judges are from these companies.
So funny.
And they're talking, they're grading them.
Sure.
And it's an opportunity. And I tell the kids, in the beginning that, you don't get paid for it. You don't get a grade, but you'll never be in front of this many hires at one time. And when they're there, you see their eyes open like, oh, I get it now.
So I was going to ask you, what do you see them light up about the most? Like, is it the racing
Just that they have the true opportunity. Roush has got his people there. Most of the Cup and IndyCar people from GM, Ford, or whoever, Honda, they're the judges. So they're hand in hand with them, right? So it's a great experience for the kids, and it's bringing new people in the sport. And you go around any racing, and you ask them, were you in Formula SAE? And you'll be surprised how many say they were involved. And it's good for them.
I think that's great. We need more stuff like that, and guys like you have to keep going and doing that.
Well, I go and nobody from the school goes. And I get mad. And I talk to one of the heads high ups in the school. I'm going, I know you spend millions on your football team. I get it. It's TV coverage. It's worth it. I'm not cutting it down. But you give these kids absolutely nothing, and they get better jobs. Only one guy out of the football team gets on pro level.
It's a tiny percentage that are going to achieve that
These
success.
guys all go get engineering jobs and get unbelievable jobs from this program. You should be.
Can't even show the kids they're buying into it as well.
They think it's kids like building a go-kart and messing around.
But this is the conventional wisdom that we got to overcome. Is like, oh, that's just a noisy hobby for people that are obnoxious and want attention.
Well, when I first joined FAU helping them, it was like the team against the school. I'm going, no, you got it all wrong. They're your sponsor. You got to make them love this program. Then they're going to do anything for you. And same thing in racing. You got to make your sponsor happy with what you're doing to keep getting dollars or to raise the dollars.
Right.
To raise your R&D or, to hit more races. You have to make your sponsor happy for what you're doing. Racing is a many businesses in one. It's not just performance. You're judged on every time you're on the track by your peers, your sponsors, by the fans. So you're judged every single day. There's no day you're not judged. So you have to do a good job, and you got to promote your sponsor. That's part of your job.
It's an art.
Yeah, absolutely.
You have a lot of experience doing that, and those kids are really going to benefit from that type of knowledge because it takes everything, working in harmony for them to be able to have a career like that, and it's all part of the bag.
Right.
You really can't divorce one thing from another. You're only going to get so far.
And we had Mr. Dingman sponsor us in IHRA Pro Stock, 8 mountain motor stuff.
Mhm.
We ran 6 or 7 years, won races, set records, tractor trailer rig, had everything. He paid for everything. He wanted me to supply the crew. I got him the engine builder, but we tested all over the country, been to almost every racetrack you could imagine.
I'm sure. I was going to say, you've been around. Yeah.
Horrible condition to test, and sometimes your test notes are junk because you can't get down. You got to detune the car so much to get down that those notes don't relate to when you get to a
Right. It's going to be a completely different environment.
Correct.
You've seen like so many tracks, and you've been in all these environments, and also over a long period of time. So you've actually seen whether or not these tracks are kept up properly, whether they're restored, repaired, or improved. I mean, I know we're losing tracks, but if there's one track that you could wave a magic wand and be like, we got to save this one. We got to do whatever we can to make sure this track is never in danger so it lasts another 50, 100 years. It's that important. Do you have a track that you...
That's an excellent question because I love all forms of motorsports. But being a Florida boy and spending so much of my life in Daytona, road racing, 12 hours, 24 hours. I've been parts of 24-hour races that won, been part of cups, wins and titles and championships. I've had a lot. I've been in Winter Circle with different teams, and I grew up there. And it has such a history of famous people from around the world with a 24-hour race. All the heroes in NASCAR over the years, and then they do a lot of local racing. So you can run road course there. It's a big venue. They always do well. I don't want to lose any of them. I hate losing. We're losing West Palm or Moroso. But Daytona has so much heritage, to other people besides me. But in my eyes, since I live in Florida, I was there so much and lived so much of it that I would never want to see Daytona be anything but a track. And I think NASCAR is pretty strong. It's probably not on any trouble right now. It doesn't say 50 years from now things don't change, but Daytona would probably be the one I'd pick.
I've never been to Daytona. How would you describe the experience of going for the first time to somebody, And let's say it's at the season opener, like going to Daytona 500.
If you drive in the tunnel and the stand right before the race and the stands are full, the infield's full, it is an energy feeling going into Indianapolis 500. There's no putting it in words. The energy that's in there, it's just undescribable to me. And going into Daytona 500, it's the same way. It's just everybody's so geeked up and wanting to, all the competitors think they're going to do good. It's just it's hard to describe. You got to experience.
It's our modern Coliseum,
It is. It is exactly.
Yeah, I can imagine. So that's on my list. So,
yeah, you have to go and you need to go in with a team so you can get in the garage and, I'll try to help you, but
no, who knows, right?
Right. But you got to experience it, from in the garage too.
Yeah.
And like I've been part of the 24-hour win. We've had many wins in that as customers, and I helped the team win one year. They beat Tony Stewart in the last lap.
I remember that.
I was there and I got the engine builder for the team, and we started losing a head gasket. I was sitting with the telemetry guy, stayed up when I go with the team, Jim Bell's team. I would stay up all night with the data acquisition guy. Yeah. Well, I'm not a computer guy, but I sit with him. But I'm monitoring engine, pan vacuum.
I was going to say, what types of things are you looking for?
They had, where the steering wheels, brake, they're watching everything. But I'm paying attention to the engine. Yeah. So I seen temperature go up and pan vacuum go down. I knew he's losing a head gasket. I went to my friend, Jim Bell. He runs the whole team. I said, have him short shift until we can figure it out.
Right.
Don't come in.
He doesn't, finish it off.
Yeah, just, short shift it. And so I went to the engine builder And I told him we're having trouble, and he started packing his stuff up, and I started screaming at him like, "What the f are you doing?" You know,
right.
I said, "It's not over till that thing don't run." So I said, "You didn't bring any block seal or nothing?" So I went up and down pit lane, found some. We put it in quick fill, went back out. It held, and then like 4 o'clock in the morning, it's happening. I came in, gave it another shot. He ended up winning the race, and we're in the winner's circle. I was in tears. You know, they're shooting the confetti.
Yeah,
and
incredible.
I'm yelling at the engine, but like, you were going home.
You were
gave
going
up.
Pack up.
Yeah, I said, you can't give up. You can never give up.
Yeah,
and that's
got to be in your bones.
Yeah.
You know, where you go to bed at night, or you look back and you say, you know what, I'll try my best. I didn't leave anything on the table.
Oh, I've had my heart ripped out plenty of times.
Yeah.
When we ran pro stock, we travel all the way to Western Canada and went out first round. You know, or we went to tracks and
journey.
Or we didn't qualify, or I mean, I'm going to say you learn more from the things that went wrong or you did wrong than you do out of a book or anything else.
But it makes those victories, you know, they're all standing on the shoulders of those moments.
You cannot describe the feeling. Promise you, it's better than any drug, alcohol, anything you can do.
And you've had these experiences, you know, at other tracks. I think we were talking off camera about, you know, how focused you were in Atlanta, you know, when you were testing. And I think that they actually made a rule on the spot afterwards to just be like, yeah, we're going to stop that right here. Tell me about that.
We were in Atlanta, and we did work for Bobby Allison's team. It was a 2-car team the Stavola brothers owned. It was Miller Lite, I believe, back then. And they ran our manifolds all the time. But I had made a spacer. I made it into a taper, and I worked on the flow bench, and it flowed a lot more air. But it also helps at part throttle. Everybody thinks of the blades just straight down.
Right.
People dyno it wide open. They never look at part throttle.
Yeah, they're never experiencing it.
Right. So this picked up so much power, this shape inside here. And it's one of the most copied things in our industry, but fortunately they don't copy it right. They don't understand what it's doing.
Right.
But this picked up so much, they ran over to the car when it came in. They said, "What did you change?" And they said, "Oh, we put this on."
How did you cheat?
Well, no, it wasn't cheating at the time.
I know.
They made it illegal.
But they were quickly looking for, you know, whatever that is,
Right.
whatever you just did.
They made it illegal on the spot.
How'd that feel?
And I was pissed.
Yeah.
You know, my job is to help them go quicker, you know, or get fuel mileage, or you know, we work a lot on distribution because you can only tune the engine to your worst cylinder. So if you have one lean one, you got to run enough fuel in it that the rest of them are rich on a carburetor. You know, fuel injection,
makes up for the discrepancy.
Right. So my job is to find efficiencies. So I was naturally pissed off, you know.
I'm sure you were pissed off, but then in the back of your mind, you're like, I did such a good job.
I honestly, I never looked at it that way.
No.
I want the team to do better.
Sure.
That's my goal. So I forgot about, you know, that part of it.
Yeah.
And then there's a few times at Daytona that we got caught, the things they didn't like, and they would make like 19 or 20 cars not even be able to pull on the track of our manifold. We had to change them. I had to get 3 of my guys and
how could you possibly do that in time?
we were up all night. We cut, I don't have one here, but we had all these inserts in there around their rules.
Sure.
You know, they had plugs that had to go, and we built everything around it to work better on restrictor plate. And Nascar looked in there and just had a cow. They had me in a trailer screaming at me.
It's so ironic. Like they instituted a rule thinking
all their jigs fit.
Yeah. You know,
but it pissed them off when they seen the creativity in there.
It fired up all this innovation. I don't know. That's just wild to think about, right?
Well,
this is going to take care of the problem. You know,
I had to borrow a local guy's shop. He gave me the keys, and I brought 3 of my guys up from Fort Lauderdale. We cut I had half the field. You know, I had to get a cart and cover them because I couldn't let people see the other cylinders' ports the way they were shaped. So I had to put them in bags, and I had to borrow a tire pit cart. And I had like 20 manifolds. I'm going through and everybody's looking at me. Look at this idiot.
Yeah, what's he doing? Right.
But we stayed up all night, had them all fixed. NASCAR was happy. One sat on the pole, and one won the race. Not that the manifold did it, but it was it was part of it. And I had a team, I won't say who, wanted me to fly. They would fly me back in their jet to their facility and fix them and use their shop.
Right, come show us what you did.
No, but they said you can't bring the rest. I said, I can't do that to everybody.
Yeah. Well, that's doing what's right. And That's that attitude that's,
Yeah, I
got you this far.
right.
Yeah. Not giving up.
Yeah, no, I wasn't going to let him. You're telling Richard Childress and Yates and all these people they can't qualify. They wouldn't let him pull out to qualify with them on.
Yeah. What am I supposed to go tell those guys? Yeah.
Yeah. No, I wasn't going to tell him that.
Yeah. Well, you went back to the drawing board and look what happened. What about when you're trying to account for distance? Does that have a factor in kind of what type of parameters you're looking for in your testing?
Yeah, absolutely. We were fortunate enough to do a lot with Joe Gibbs' team when Tony Stewart was there, and through the years with them, with Mark Konkos, a famous engine builder. He's one of the best in the world.
Yeah,
and that's where I met Jason Lyon. He actually ran the dynos there, and we became real close friends. And I worked with Jason through KB when he ran Pro Stock with Greg Anderson.
Nice. You guys spent time together.
Yeah, I stay at his house. In fact, I'm going up there soon because next weekend is the first IHRA race. I'm going to go with him.
Cool.
But the different tracks definitely have a different way for the engine, for the aero. Like Daytona, Talladega, we would test at Talladega, like I said, with Joe Gibbs. I was there one time and they had a pit cart that had over $1 million of computers on it, engineers just sitting around. It was a big cart. And they had one car for aero, one car for chassis, one car for engine. I was on the engine car. And we were actually working on manifolds in the garage and flipping them around.
Oh, wow.
So we were testing.
Like real time.
Right. And we actually brought O2s closer, the distribution.
Right.
They could lean it out. We picked up fuel mileage and we picked up speed. Well, then I told Mark, I said, we need to stack the cars, meaning.
That's what I was going to ask next. I know that you also took that to the stacking, and then how that's going to affect the airflow.
Well, every crew chief has his own list of what he wants to accomplish. And Mark's like, these guys aren't going to go for that. I go, we're here. It's the only chance we're going to pick up data, on air going into cowl back then for the, how the air gets into the engine.
Mm-hmm.
And I finally got him to do it. And we stacked them up and the O2s went crazy. We went back to work. We brought it together. And then he was telling the team, this is, why we bring other people in.
Sure.
But it enabled us to make the car better in the draft because even if, you have a great driver like Tony Stewart and he's out front, you do pit changes, whatever, then you're behind.
Yeah, he's always going to have to.
Right. So you need to look at all that. Where at a shorter track, you're not dealing with so much aero. And at Talladega or Daytona, you're holding it flat-footed. The motor just run at a certain RPM all day long. So valve train's important. There's a lot of aspects that, everybody's got to look at in a different way. The shorter tracks or a Daytona, the RPM window is very narrow. So it allows the engine builders, camshaft wise and all that, they have a very narrow window. Where in a shorter track, they have a much larger RPM band.
Right.
They have to make power.
And that's going to be at a track like Bristol?
Right. Tip and throttle, all that stuff means so much more than most people realize. And the engine builders and the chassis setup, I'm ignorant to a lot of that, but, air, how it goes across the spoiler, they look at so much stuff that's different from track to track. So absolutely conditions are completely different. And even in some drag tricks, you go to Denver, you're racing altitude. The engine's got to be adjusted different. The gear ratio is different. So every track is different.
Sure.
You go to Indianapolis, it's a flat turn where Daytona, Talladega are banked.
Right.
They has a few degrees of banking, but absolutely every track has its own characteristics and you have to tune the car, driver, and engine to that track.
Is there anyone else that, you feel has spent as much time trying to perfect this part of the craft, and it doesn't have to be a competitor per se, but maybe a colleague that you've worked with where like they're as dedicated as you've been to really focusing on this?
That's another great question. I think there's many, in my world, I worry about my customers. Mm-hmm. But I work like Jason Lyon is one of the most hardworking guys I know. His ethics are good. He's intelligent and he will beat on it till it's right. You know what I mean? And there's, I probably take a minute, but there's many people in our industry, the Jessel family, what they did to valve train, they completely changed it. Wayne and Danny Jessel, just camshafts, pistons, total seal rings, they refine the ring. I think there's people that lead in each area are as passionate or hardworking as I don't think I'm any different than any of them. I just focus in this one area. On airflow wise, there's many people, but they usually did a cylinder head we were the first company, I believe, in the world to just do manifolds at first. Most people supplied them because, I'm getting the heads from a head porter. Well, I need a manifold. Well, they would just make it fit, and they weren't that creative. We changed runner links, taper, approach to the runner. I don't know, and there may be somebody. I'm not big headed, but I don't think anybody spent the time that we have at studying what goes on in a manifold.
In my short time,
and I'm still learning.
Yeah.
And I'm still learning.
Right. It's a lifelong pursuit. Yeah. In my short time talking to you and spending time here at your facility, which is amazing. And I really appreciate you giving us, sort of run of the place and showing us everything. I can only imagine how much of your life and your passion you've dedicated to perfecting your craft. And like you said, in the name of safety, in the name of the sport, the drivers, because it all trickles back down. Right. And I'm sure that one day, hopefully somebody will take up that mantle, and pick your brain and say, like, I want to continue doing this.
And I have people here I mentor. I want to pass it on, but like some of the manufacturers, the sanction bodies, think I'm a bad guy. Like I've been just beat up by NASCAR officials and like I'm always cheating. It's like I'm just trying to make them. We helped Tasca go that 341 in Bradenton.
Yeah.
In a funny car. Well, he shows up to Gainesville. They took all his manifolds. I'm like, come on. It's just, the officials look at it the wrong way. If you can make the engine run better, cleaner, better distribution, it blows up less. It's less money for the teams. It's less oil downs, stopping the show. It's not like we're adding 1,000 horsepower.
Sure.
They automatically think because the car is quicker. We work on good cars. They're good teams, but we usually find something to make them quicker, but it isn't by 10 mile an hour or, we prepped a car for Le Mans a few years ago and we changed, we were allowed to make our restrictors.
I'm already smiling because I know. Yeah, go ahead.
And we picked them up 7 mile an hour in the back straightaway. And they nobody knew what we did, but we did the manifold, we did the restrictors.
That's significant.
And I worked on the scoop going to the restrictors. So, there is gains to be had, but usually it's an efficiency, fuel mileage, less engine breakage, acceleration. I don't really want them to go too fast top speed, but I want them to accelerate quicker than their competitor. And we study a lot of acceleration. People get lost on the dyno and flow benches thinking that's all the answer. It's not.
Yeah.
It's about cylinder analysis and cylinder pressure.
And you must be excited because now you have all these new tools and new ways to measure data, all the data that you've always had, and then, new stuff. But the future's, I'm sure, very exciting for you. So
thank you. And like I said before, it's being around such top people that's honed our skills. By getting real answers. Did this work? Why didn't it work? Or why did it work? Those, if you pay attention to those details, will make you better in anything.
Well, I can't thank you enough for letting us do this and participating in this and being excited about doing this. And I can only hope that I'm able to spend more time with people like you who really have a passion for the sport and care about the future. And I have a feeling this won't be our last time chatting together, and I look forward to the next time.
Well, I thank you, and I'm honored that you asked, and I hope you all have success in the world, because I want tracks to have success for racing and for everybody involved.
Well, if we keep working on this, then maybe these legends will never fade.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you, Keith. Thanks for watching the Racetrack Prince podcast. If you like this episode, hit subscribe, share this with another racing fan, and together we'll make sure these legends never fade. I'll see you in the next one.